and I'm going to have to jump in a little bit, but I appreciate everybody joining our session on Rubrik for virtual environments. Jack is going to take over for me. I'm actually doing double duty in Palo Alto in another session as well. But you're in good hands. Jack runs all of our SEs and our technical acumen for the US. So he's going to help us out and present Rubrik for virtual environments. I will follow up with everybody after this webinar to get you your deep sea fishing trips tickets. You can definitely invite, bring one more. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jack. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Good morning, Alan. Like Alan mentioned, my name is Jack Bailey. I'm an SE manager for Rubrik based out of Houston, Texas. And today I'm going to walk you through really the story around Rubrik and virtualization and walk through a brief demonstration as well. Before we get started, definitely wanted to say a quick thank you to one of our sponsors, Palo Alto Networks. Obviously, when we're talking about the importance of protecting data, a couple key components of that would be certainly trying to prevent a lot of the activities that cause data loss in the first place through the ability of using really advanced and intelligence firewalling. And of course, with things like backup and connectivity, having reliable backend infrastructure is a huge component as well. So big thank you to Palo Alto Networks and a great technical partner of ours to check out and look more into. So we'll start a little bit with the story around Rubrik and really how we came to market, and then tie that into some virtual infrastructure stories, and then conclude with a brief demonstration in a lab environment as well. So we'll go ahead and kick it off. Our founder, Bipul Sinha, really when he was working with the Nutanix team as one of their initial venture capitalists, was looking at the impact of hyperconvergence, advancements in IT, and really where in the IT space not a lot of changes had been made and not a lot of efficiencies had been made. And when I talk to customers, either at this current role or over my 13 or 14 years in the backup and data protection space, most customers are not very excited to talk about their backup, frankly, because there's a lot of complexities, a lot of single points of failures, a lot of full-time employees required to make the whole thing work. And if you look at it, it makes a lot of sense. Not really a whole lot's changed since the 90s. There's a large level of complexities. You got different backup components, servers, proxies, replication appliances, databases, and then of course tape and offsite archive. In fact, if you fast forward to even 20 years ago, really the only advancement has been the advent of deduplication and utilizing backup storage in place of or in complement of tape. But when you look at this, there's still a lot of complexity here. A lot of single points of failure and a lot of things to update and manage on a day-to-day basis to make this overall system work. So how does Rubrik fit into that? Well, Rubrik converges backup software, replication, the catalog bases, the storage, and puts it into a single software fabric that can be deployed as a plug-and-play appliance. Software appliance or in the cloud or a combination of all three. It doesn't have the complex bloated architecture of legacy protection systems, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. So it's a single software platform to orchestrate application data from data center to cloud, instantly power on applications anywhere, and more importantly, be able to do recovery, search in both the cloud or even for test dev purposes as well. So since we're a single scale out architecture, this allows customers to continue managing as a single system, and I'll show you this in the lab in a moment, very easily without forklift upgrades. So a customer can start with something as small as a single cloud cluster, a single physical or virtual appliance, and basically grow out from there and add the resources they need and add that to their pool of resources over time, still maintaining and managing from a single infrastructure without the need to do an overall forklift upgrade there. Scales very nicely. And just for clarity, when we talk about cloud within this presentation, we're really talking about anything that's not on our brick. Our goal, being a cloud data management company, is to allow you to leverage our appliance where it makes sense, but more importantly, allow us to manage the data, the metadata, the components of that for recovery and for other purposes, whether it's on our appliance or utilizing local storage capacity, say like NFS or S3 object, or of course, components like AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud as well. So what does this look like? How does it work? Well, frankly, it's a very simple deployment process for any of the scenarios. We'll focus specifically on a VMware or a virtual environment, which could include VMware Hyper-V or Acropolis today. So quick start. Basically, it's a plug-and-play appliance. Typically, it takes maybe half an hour to an hour to deploy. We auto-discover virtual and physical environments, the hosts, the VMs, the databases through our APIs and our connectors. And from there, we automate as much as possible, right? And we'll show you this in the lab in a moment, but one of the great things about Rubrik is really how there's a lot of intelligence in the background here. It's what we call a declarative system for protecting data, where you essentially tell Rubrik the frequency you'd like to protect your data sets, your various snappables, so to speak. And Rubrik will do adaptive throttling and all the backend processes, garbage collection, all of that transparently to you as an end user to make those jobs essentially successful for you without you managing it and requiring full-time employees for that process, right? Basically free up your team to do more revenue generating tasks than looking at your data protection on a day-to-day basis. It's also worth mentioning on the automation side, however, that 100% of Rubrik is available through API calls as well. So we integrate very nicely with things like vRealize and ServiceNow, as well as other components like, say, Ansible, Puppet, Chef, and other automation systems of PowerShell, right? So whether you use it through the GUI, which I'll demo in my lab in a moment, or through external methodology, that automation is there and fantastic to use. So rapid ingest. Basically, Rubrik delivers really fast data extraction. We minimize performance impact to your production environment, minimize stun effect for virtual environments as well, and have a really nice distributed workflow management system to maximize how fast we pull data in and the number of different streams we can pull data in. Long story short, we really speed up the backup and data protection process to reduce the amount of impact to your environment compared to legacy systems. Combining that with content-aware deduplication and a single global namespace allows for really significant data reduction in an intelligent capacity, as well as really great search and recovery as well, whether it's on-prem, in the cloud, or on local storage capacity as well. When we talk about all of this data protection, though, the most important component of it is instant recovery. So with a single click, users can instantly recover virtual machines, such as VMware and Hyper-V, or SQL databases by basically allowing for SQL to be presented directly from our brick, or a virtual machine directly from our brick, without any additional storage provisioning required. So it's a very fast, very efficient process. And to your end users, it's again very transparent, where the systems, SQL, virtual machines are all available and accessible to your end users within a couple clicks and a couple moments as well. Security is obviously huge, and this is important for everyone in every environment. So important things to know about Rubrik: end-to-end encryption, so whether it's in flight, at rest, in the cloud, on the brick, always encrypted. And very important as well is basically Rubrik stores data in an immutable format, so you can recover quickly from things like ransomware without data loss. We have customers that have used this for a significant number of different purposes, but it's very important to make sure that your data that's being protected by backup systems is done so in a way where, frankly, these days more advanced ransomware technologies can actually target backup repositories as well, and Rubrik is not susceptible to that today, which is a very important component of data protection. And last but not least, we mentioned a little bit around this, but cloud is a big component of Rubrik. This allows the flexibility for customers to say, hey, if I want to keep a certain number of days or certain number of content on the actual appliance itself, but I want to archive or I want to do disaster recovery to something like AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, you have those capabilities too. So Cloud Out is the ability to archive to different locations and still have access to that data via global search for quick restoration back to your on-prem environment. And Cloud On is our ability for us to essentially immediately power on virtual guests from a VMware type environment into AWS or Azure, with us doing the conversion process for you directly as well. So just as a quick summary, if you look at a legacy traditional rollout environment with all the different components in it, and you look at the complexity and again the issues that come with that, and you instead look at what a Rubrik environment looks like. Essentially, we're taking all those different components and really boiling it down to an easy to scale out appliance where you can scale the amount of storage, capacity, and compute by simply adding additional bricks with an infinite scale out infrastructure approach. And of course, the ability to complement that by being able to consume storage where it makes sense for your archive or your retention policies, whether that's on-prem via things like NFS or S3 object storage, or if we're talking about the cloud, which again could include targets such as AWS, Google Cloud Platform, or Microsoft Azure as well. This really, again, creates a very complete story overall. So whether your applications are born on-prem, in this case in a virtual environment type approach, customers can do replication from one site to another, allow for disaster recovery type activities, or from their on-prem box, be able to do instant spin up of virtual guests for test DR purposes or even test and dev servers, as well as protect their production servers at the same time and same interface there. So as a quick summary, we've built a software platform that manages your data throughout its life cycle. The application data is captured through backup, recovery, and then can be used for offsite disaster recovery purposes. We can orchestrate application data in the cloud, as we mentioned before, for archive instantly, and then being able to unlock the cloud as a resource for test, dev, DR purposes through that cloud on feature. Our SQL live mount capability means you can immediately spin up copies of SQL database for developer, test purposes, read-write access, or even on-demand access to databases for being able to restore components of your database instantly. Have incredible search analytics. So whether your data resides on the platform, in the cloud, on local storage, have the ability to find that data quickly and also be able to run analytics through our Rubrik Envision approach, which gives you great visibility for compliance, analytics, other things like that. And as I mentioned as well, all of this is on an API-first architecture, which really means that no matter what, you can leverage a powerful different suite of APIs to automate workflows through a number of different third-party services, some of which I mentioned before, right? So great capabilities there. In the TOLA region, a great number of customers have been recently added here, great customers to work with. And specifically on the virtualization side, proud to say that at last year's VMworld, we won Best in Show as well as a Gold Award for data protection. So we've been recognized both by VMware as well as a number of other analyst firms due to the tremendous pace of our product releases, the customer feedback we've employed, the simplicity the product provides, and really the efficiency of both scale and day-to-day operations. So if we look at the benefits overall, quick summary of all this, right? Really easy to deploy. We mentioned how set it and forget it in a 30-minute, 60-minute process. Immediately having Rubrik begin ingesting data from the environment, indexing the environment, and allowing you to protect apps within a couple clicks, which I'll show you in the lab here in just a moment. Incredibly easy to scale. So you can start off small, grow as you need to in terms of cloud capacity, in terms of additional physical appliances, or adding remote and branch office locations through our virtual appliance as well. And the really great thing about all of this is really the lowered cost because of this. If you think back to the complexity and the number of different components, the number of different systems to manage in a traditional or legacy data protection architecture, on average, we save customers a tremendous amount of money versus the legacy approach. Typically 20, 30, 50% cheaper than, say, Commvault, EMC, Veritas, and others as well. So a great way to modernize data protection, automate data protection, and also reduce the cost components from a hard cost perspective as well. So with that, I will pull up my lab environment briefly for us, and we'll take a real quick look at the tool in action with a focus around virtualization. All right, so let me resume sharing the environment. And at this point, you'll see my lab. Now, as I mentioned before, you can access Rubrik appliances through a number of different approaches. Again, ServiceNow, vRealize, automation through PowerShell, Puppet Chef. For today's demonstration, I'll walk you through our user interface, our GUI, and just focus on a few components around VMware and Hyper-V virtualization, and talk around how that part works. So as I mentioned, getting started with the Rubrik appliances are really easy. You essentially pull up your GUI, you point it at your vCenter, your System Center, your Nutanix clusters, and immediately we start looking at those environments and what virtual machines are available to be protected, and allow you to then start applying policies to those. Now, in addition to virtual machines, and we won't go into a lot of details, the focus today is based on virtualization, you can of course protect things, as I mentioned before, like SQL, Oracle, physical Linux and Windows hosts, unstructured data like NAS, and most recently AIX support as well. And we're constantly adding additional what we call snappables to protect. But if we look at, say, vSphere-based virtual machines, let's look at what it takes to protect some within the Rubrik interface. So if I go into my SLA domains, SLA domains simply stands for service level agreement domains. This is a way for you to tell Rubrik what protection needs to look like for a specific set of objects within the environment. Cool thing here is when you create an SLA domain, you're not necessarily creating this just for VMware-based virtual machines or for Hyper-V or Acropolis. It could be a policy that you apply to anything in the environment. So if you come in and you say, hey, I need to have protection that occurs every hour, and I want to keep that level of protection for 5 days, and I also want to do dailies and keep those for 30 days, and then roll up months to a year, and keep my years for a couple of years. You could create as many of these domains as you'd like, and it's really as simple as that click-through process I just did, and apply it to any object in the environment. I'll show you what that looks like here momentarily. What's nice, though, as we mentioned before, is because we are a cloud data management company, you have the ability to come in here and with just a couple clicks say, hey, I would really like to archive the data out to a cloud target. And I only want to keep maybe a month or so on the actual brick itself, and I'll show you why this is possible here in just a moment, and keep the rest of it on a more cost-effective archive target. We could support, again, on the cloud side, things like Glacier, infrequent access, S3 buckets, hot and cold Azure, blob storage, local NFS, S3 object storage, a lot of different options. So you can create the policy where it makes sense and apply it to where it's going to be most cost-effective and most beneficial for your day-to-day recovery and auditing and retention schedule requirements there, right? You can also set up replications. We saw one of the diagrams in the slide deck. If I wanted to periodically do replication from, say, my production lab environment and have that also available in my Europe location as well, maybe for 7 days instead of 30 days, just because this would be more of a failover type approach, I can do that, and I can click create. I've now got that SLA policy created, and I can apply that to various virtual guests within the environment. So what does that look like? Well, really, after you create an SLA domain, you can search for, and I'll show you really briefly from, say, VMware perspective. I could apply an SLA domain to an entire vCenter host cluster type perspective. So maybe I've created a bronze policy, and I say, hey, 80% of the VMs in my environment need to be protected by the bronze policy. I can quickly come in here, click on my vCenter, click Manage Protection, apply my bronze policy to it. Every VM within that virtual environment now has the bronze policy applied. But maybe I say, okay, within that same cluster, I've got a specific folder that needs to have a silver policy applied. I've created a certain set of number of daily protection or hourly protection, amount of time I retain the data, the target, and all that, and I want to apply that to a certain folder. I can apply that to a folder and say, yeah, let's apply the silver policy here. And then I could go to specific VMs within the environment and apply maybe a gold policy to them. So as you can see, you can very quickly, within maybe 2 minutes and a couple clicks, take an environment like this that has multiple hundred VMs and apply policies at the global or broad level and reduce that all the way down to a per VM and more granular basis, again, within a couple clicks and a couple moments there. So very, very simple to apply those policies and get all that in place for you, right? Now, protection is probably the less exciting part of disaster recovery and backup. It's really the recovery that's valuable, right? It's not necessarily exciting to have a backup process happen, albeit Rubrik makes that process incredibly easy and incredibly automated. Let's take a look at what recovery looks like in action. So I have a VM, a Linux or Windows guess. It doesn't really matter. We'll just pick the Windows one right now. This being protected by Rubrik, and it's currently part of I think my gold SLA here. We'll take a look at it in action real quick. When I click on a particular VM, it'll show me some detail here around what SLA is part of, what's the oldest, what's the latest snapshot, and then give me some ability to do some restoration here. So let's say, for example, I have a very important file. I say, great, I really need to restore this specific file. If I click on the file, I can browse through all the various iterations of that file. And what's nice about this, and this ties back to what I mentioned before around not needing to keep years of data on our appliances, but being able to use perhaps more efficient or cost-effective storage targets, like in this case S3, or again, local on-prem storage. But here's why this is possible, because whether it's on the cloud or on my appliance, I can do the exact same behaviors. Maybe I want to restore this file from my November copy of the data that's now out in S3. I can click on Restore, decide what my parameters look like for that. And even though that's a 7-month-old data set from S3, with a couple clicks there, I've basically restored that data back to that virtual machine through the GUI, through that global search functionality, very, very simple and efficiently. And I could have done so through outside automation capabilities as well. All right, so that's what maybe a file level restore looks like. Let's take a look at what it looks like to recover a virtual machine or a virtual guest within the environment as well. Okay, so on the same interface, the same page here, I've gone ahead and I've selected down from the monthly view. I've zoomed into today. And I believe I'm taking snapshots maybe every 8 hours or so for this particular VM. Again, you can get a lot more granular or a lot more broad than that if you need to. But I've got some options here. I've got the ability, if I need to browse files. Maybe I don't know the file name, but I know where it's at. I could browse the sort of drop-down folder menu. I can export it. But here's where things, to me, are much more exciting. From the single pane of glass here, I can, if I'd like, if I was archiving out to one of our cloud providers that we have capabilities with, I could say, hey, I've been archiving out to S3. I don't want to power this thing on-prem. I want to power it out in Amazon. I can click on Launch on Cloud, and Rubrik will convert that virtual guest for me to AMI format and power that on into a VMware environment, or in this case, an AWS environment for me. It's really, really quick and easy. If I want to bring that back online, say in my Hyper-V or my VMware environment, I can simply click on Mount or Instant Recover. I'll walk you through that real quick. Mount is the ability within Rubrik to say, hey, leave the production machine alone, but basically bring on a copy of that virtual machine in VMware, in this case, as maybe a DR test or dev copy of the virtual machine. So let me log into vSphere for us real quick. And what we'll see down in the bottom here are some tasks occurring where basically we've said, hey, Rubrik, present yourself as storage to VMware and immediately power on that virtual machine. So what does that mean to an end user? Well, it really means is that within 30, 60 seconds, that end user could have access to either a production copy or a test dev or DR copy of the data running off of our appliance, so no need to really find the extra storage capacity or always using production storage for this purpose until you need it, right? It's running off of our appliance right now. If I want to keep a copy of it, I can simply move it to my production storage through a couple clicks, and the end user sees very minimal downtime. In that 20-second period, I went from not having this virtual machine exist in inventory to powering on and just about ready for that end user to have access to it. Very, very quick, very easy. And really the only difference between Mount and Instant Recover is Mount leaves the production machine alone, brings on a new copy in the inventory, and Instant Recover brings up basically a production copy of the data on our brick to be used for disaster recovery purposes and to basically replace the original copy of the machine. So very quick, very easy to gain access to that. And to really tie things down and summarize today, visibility is huge within the appliance as well. So out of the box, a number of really good compliancy-based reports, that you can schedule for a number of different users within the environment for visibility there. But you can also create your own reports as well. And just some examples, you can set up whatever components you'd like to see around data reduction, around compliancy, around backup success schedules, other elements like that in the environment with a couple clicks through the GUI there. Now, one thing I want to point out at the very end here is recently we've also launched a new platform called Polaris. And Polaris, in its initial release, is the ability, it's a component of Polaris called GPS. It's the ability, if customers have multiple different locations, and a good example of this would be being based out of Houston, as I am, a number of my customers may be, say, oil and gas related, or financial related, or medical related, where they have a number of different locations, say, doctor branch offices, banks, or platforms and rigs across the world that they want to manage from a single pane of glass. And ultimately with Rubrik, whether it's running in the cloud, on-prem, whatever it's running as, you have the ability to quickly and easily come in and see the various health and success criteria happening in those environments, be able to drill down quickly and easily, to do reporting and troubleshooting. And by the way, in our lab environment, some of these failed tasks are purposeful just to show some activity here. But also maybe more importantly for auditing purposes, go in and say, okay, I need to do a compliancy report, and I need to see where things have been successful, and maybe I just want to see that for virtual machines over the past 7 days in Europe specifically. So really great capabilities with our Polaris platform to really provide visibility to monitoring, reporting, activity, troubleshooting across all the sites from a single pane of glass, and give that visibility where it makes sense within the environment. With that, as Alan mentioned at the beginning of the call, he'll be reaching out, providing information to you guys in regards to the upcoming fishing trip. I hope today's information was helpful. It was recorded, and we'll definitely be able to follow up with that recording for you guys if you'd like to review or share with other members of your team. With that being said, thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to talking with you guys in the future, whether it's on a fishing boat or on more of a one-on-one basis in person or via a Zoom session. Thanks again. Have a great rest of your day.